the biggest issues that I've always experienced when I've been in your seats is retention. And it's really hard to learn a concept and not put it into practical use and then like figure out where you're going from there. So what I encourage you guys to do is please interrupt me. What you're gonna see is as we go through these slides, you're gonna see little icons at certain points. They're gonna be little keyboards. What that means is I'm gonna go off slide and I'm gonna do a live demo, which means we're gonna be doing this together. And anything comes up, if I start talking too fast or anything like that, or you miss something that I've said, please reach out. If you guys wanna, if you have laptops and you wanna go along with me, really quick, if you open up codepen.io, you could actually jump in there and maybe try some of the stuff that I'm talking about right in live. Cool? So let's get started. So introduction to CSS for product managers. So a lot of this, what I'm talking about, what I'm going to be covering today, is going to really empower you for conversation. There's just not enough time. Yeah, go ahead. The password. Perfect. Thank you. Nice. Sorry about that. Cool. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be tools to empower you for conversations that you could have with your teams, developers, designers, other product managers in a meaningful way. And let's start with like that basic concept. What is CSS? So CSS is cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets, what they're meant to do is provide the framework in which to have your HTML live within a visual experience. It covers a whole ton of stuff. At one point it was simply for layout, but now it's come to the point that it's a meaningful part of interactions. You have hover states, and we'll talk about that, like what a pseudo class is, what a class is, what an ID is. You normally see this, and I'm actually kind of happy this is going to be the first time that a background has more value than simply a stupid texture. On this side is HTML. On this side is CSS. Colors, meaning. What I'm going to teach you today is how to make this side that normally looks like a texture have some type of meaning. And right now this is a ton of nonsense, but if you could just focus in on this right now, we're going to give that meaning by the end of this talk. CSS borrows from a very old tradition, print. So a lot of the terminology that you're going to experience, if you picked up a book that was very old, you're going to realize that things like the word margin, line height, font space, font family, all of those things, if you have that, or if you've ever been exposed to that, or if you ever picked up a book, you could do CSS. CSS is not code, it's markup language. It supports markup language. It's really more syntax to allow rules to have an impact on your HTML. So let's get started. Let's dive in. There are 3 flavors of CSS that I'm going to start with. Just really quickly, how many of you guys have ever worked with CSS before? Yeah. Okay. Any experts or anything like that? I don't want anyone testing me. All right. So the 3 flavors that I'll start with, and then we'll sort of build off of that. You have your external style sheets, right? Those are what get linked. They live somewhere else. You have a server, and let's just pretend a server is a big black box, and there's a ton of stuff going on in there. You have JavaScript, you have Rails, you have all these different weird things that are going on in there. CSS is just one of those flavors that's tossed in there. And the only way you can make that have a relationship with your HTML files is you need to link it. So this is exactly how you'd have the structure of a linked style sheet. So you have link, right in the bracket, that's the meat. What this relates to is a style sheet, the type, it's text and CSS based. These things are always going to be that. They will never change. You're just gonna see this a million times. There's no other way to do this. There's not gonna be numbers behind it. There's not gonna be colors behind it. This is CSS, it's simple. But we're gonna build off of how this can change later on. And this is a relative link. You've seen this before if you've ever seen HTML. Anchor link, ref, which simply means hyperlink reference. That's all it means. Theme.css, this means that these things, you guys used Windows or Mac before, you know what a folder is, I'm sure. This means that the file that I am using, this theme.css, is in the same exact file. Sometimes you're gonna see a slash in front of it and then another name. That means it's in a folder that's in this directory that it's referencing. This is not complicated stuff. It's simple. You can copy and paste this, and you literally can become CSS gurus off of that one. Internal. No one really uses this. You'll probably come across this on email every once in a while. It typically is not the common place to be used, but sometimes you can test ideas out with it. So what it is, it's style tags. These style tags, they live in your header, typically. Sometimes people put them in a body. That's not where it belongs. Put it in a header. If you don't have access to the header, it's going to be in the body. You'll see it in email. It'll be stuck in there. This H1 is header 1, highest level header. I changed the color to blue. That's all I did. And it has some default properties. And we're going to talk about what properties are afterwards. But I said, hey, give this property color of header 1 the color blue. And then I threw in a paragraph. P stands for paragraph. Color red. And it's done. That's internal. This is the next flavor. The last flavor, which I think is going to be the most interesting thing for you guys today, is inline. Inline is going to be combined with some of the things that I come off screen with. It's going to allow us to make some on-the-fly changes. And I'm kind of excited about showing this to you guys. Is like, hey, you guys ever been in a situation where you want to try an idea out? Maybe you saw a site and you're like, I really would like this button to be a different color. Maybe round that corner. Curious on what that looks like. Maybe take a screenshot of that and do something meaningful with it. Inline can be a really great, powerful tool to just try concepts out. And that's something that you can do literally anywhere, anytime. A little quick aside, you can literally do all of this on any machine at any time without any type of IDE. You don't need a complex machine. You can literally get an old Windows 3.1, like something that you probably haven't heard in a long time. And if you can create a file that's .html and a file that's .css, you can literally do 90% of the things that we're going to talk about today. So that's the nice thing about CSS. There's no reason why you can't go out tomorrow and start using this in your day-to-day. I highly encourage you because the concepts here, to be honest with you, they're so dense. There's so many different ways to do things that you need to find sort of your own path to charge forward. So I've spent enough time on this slide. Let's move on. So how much CSS do you need to know in order to communicate with the team? And to be honest with you, I don't know. I can't answer that for you. What I can only do is ensure that you don't go into situations where you're talking to someone and using terminology that you have no idea what you're talking about. If you're going to say font, you better know what that means. So if you're going to use the words, be empowered to use them. And anything that you start with here, use that tomorrow. There's nothing wrong. And there's no wrong with that. These are elements. These are HTML elements. You're familiar with them. H1, header 1, P, paragraph, table TD, TD. That's a typo. That's supposed to be TR, not TD. Pretend you didn't see that. Table row. That's what it should be. And TD stands for table data. These all have rules. That's a div, span, button. Unordered list with a list in it. Anchor, image. These are 9 things that I just took that are basically, you'll see them all over the internet. They're meaningful to you. You're going to see them over and over and over again. They're the basic function. What you don't have here is HTML5. I didn't include section. I didn't include header. These are new tags that the World Wide Web Consortium, which I will talk to you about later, have introduced into the HTML vocabulary to help people with their SEO, with their website structure, things like that. So we'll start with these first 9, and it's a good place to start. These basic elements are what you will use as your selector. Anytime you have a page, you have a ton of stuff. And on that page, the only way you can attach meaning, right? That's what CSS is, rules and meaning, that you can attach it is you need to select something. And what we will be selecting today, I believe, are headers, paragraphs, and we'll see what else. Maybe we'll go off book. Maybe we'll try something else. So, with that said, let me do this. This is CodePen.io. This is one of the coolest things I think that's come out, especially for me. I don't want to set up a new file and a new folder and a new whatever. I want to just get down to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type some stuff. And this stuff might be kind of familiar to you. I'm going to close up my div, ignore the HTML stuff because that's really not what we're talking about today. I'm going to add this to it. And I'm going to add this to it. And quite honestly, these are random. I have no idea what I'm really doing right now. All I'm doing is I created a div. Actually, that's a lie. I know exactly what I'm doing right now, but it's not doing anything here. So this doesn't have any idea what it's doing right now. All it has is the properties of div, a header, and a paragraph. I've stuck them in there. I'm going to try and do some stuff. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to say welcome to CSS intro number 1, hopefully. It's the first one. We got a header. We got some text on this thing. The nice thing is it's going to happen on the fly. I'm going to add some paragraph text to it now. This is the first paragraph to be added. All right. Now we got a bunch of text underneath. It looks ugly. This is not what the internet looks like anymore. But we're going to make that look better later on in this class. And this right here, there's already CSS going on naturally within it. Divs, H1s, Ps, they all have default properties that have meaning to when you use them. You can't just take a div, stick it next to another div, and say it's the same as taking an H1 and sticking next to another H1. They all have default properties. The div is a container. It has container properties. It has borders. Those borders have meaning. They have padding. They have margin. There's a concept of a box that you need to be aware of, and that box is imaginarily around all of these things. And I'll show you. The way you show, if you ever want to know what's going on a page, there's a little trick. You guys ever heard the asterisk trick? Like if you want to select all files, you ever chose the file type? Asterisk just means all. Asterisk means all. That's my selector. I'm going to select everything. Then I'm going to open up that bracket. Most times, any tool you use will close that bracket for you. I'm going to leave that cursor right in there, and I'm just going to give this a border. You don't have to remember this right now, because we're going to talk about it again later. I'm going to give this border some values. I'm going to make it 1 pixel, I'm going to make it solid, and I'm going to make it red. Now what it's going to do is going to put a red border around everything that's on the screen. These things they already exist. They have rules. This border has padding around it. This H1 is pushing things down. That paragraph is doing stuff. I can align this text, but I can't align this box. This thing is going 100%. There's so many things that's going on here that you're not aware of. And that is what I can say is really key to CSS. When you talk to a developer, when you're talking to your team members, when you want to build on CSS, you have to realize that there are tons of things that are going on, and all you need to worry about is your singular problem at any given time. Your job is not to create the standards of CSS for your team. Your job is to communicate your situation in a meaningful way so that you can empower them to solve the problem, right? So let's get back on text. All right, next thing, properties. You've seen me use one already, border. Start with margin, padding, border, background, color, position. You guys could read. I don't know why I'm reading this to you, but I'm going to go through with it anyways. Height, width, display, and visibility. I started these. I chose these at like kind of not random, but these are the ones that you're going to basically be able to do anything with. Margin, if you remember that box that I showed you earlier, is anything that is happening outside that border. That's your margin. That means there's margin on this H1 that's pushing that paragraph down. There's margin on this is the first paragraph to be added that's pushing that red border down. Otherwise, all these reds should be just really dark and tight. There's space here, and these spaces are defined by their default margins. Padding, that space that's happening on the inside of that border. You have another border. Look, not this one. There's another border that's on the other side of the border, which is inside between welcome to Css intro number 1. There's padding there. Otherwise, that text should be sitting directly on that red line. Maybe it's the line height. Maybe there's padding. There's different spacing padding between this one and that one. There's default values that are being added there. And when you need things, pixel perfect, that's a term that's used a lot in design. Pixel perfect. It's a nightmare. I came from agency. I always thought I really wanted it. But sometimes you need to have the flexibility to understand what's more important, being pixel perfect or solving a problem. Border. You saw that? It was red. We're going to revisit that again. Background. That's the color that's happening in the background. One thing that I'll tell you is that what I did not include with any of these, you can define you can really get granular. I could say background hyphen bottom, and it'll only, I'm sorry, that's a lot. Margin hyphen bottom, and that will only affect the margin on the bottom of a particular element. Background, I say background image and change the image. I could say background color, change the color. So there's a piece of this that you do not see that we can't get into because these 9 on hyphenations alone can blow up to like another 30, 40, 50 or so boxes. But I'll start you with these just so you can get a go-ahead. Color, we're gonna actually talk about color today too. Red, blue, green, hexa values, and RGBA. We'll talk about those. Position, where are things placed? Fixed, relative. These are ways you put something on a DOM itself. And a DOM is the screen. It's what you see. It's what you're interacting with. Height, width, these are affecting the CSS in a way that's telling you, oh, it's 30 pixels high, 40 pixels wide, whatever. Display, visible, invisible. Visibility and display are kind of similar. The one difference is, one, when you take it out, when you say display none, it's off the DOM. It means everything closes, it's as if it doesn't exist. Visibility means that the values, the principles, the structure around it, if you added padding and height and everything, that stays there, but it's just invisible. And that's something to keep in mind. And you're not gonna remember this. Guys, you don't have to remember this. The thing is that these things are always accessible to you, and I'm gonna tell you how to get back to these at any time. So let's talk about that. I talked about border. Let's talk about visibility. Bang, gone. It's not there. With one line, I can get rid of that without having to delete all the HTML that I created. So it's really powerful. These things individually are really powerful, and when you can use them, they make really meaningful changes into what you're trying to do. So let's dive into the CSS. Gave you a quick run, gave you a quick go ahead in terms of what's going on. So let's look at this. I told you I'm going to get you guys to understand this. And quite honestly, all you need to know is that piece up there. You have a selector. That selector has 3 components to it: selector, property, and value. And that's your godsend. That's your God piece, and it has rules around it. Beneath it, I've given you an example of what an element is, a class is, and an ID is. And each of these things have their own rules. The div is an element. That div is default. HTML comes out of the box with div ready, and it knows what a div is. You don't have to call a div a name to attach meaning to it. You can attach meaning to every single div on any page. And once you do this, every div that's on a page that does not have a default value has a height of 100 pixels, a width of 100 pixels, and it's going to be applied to it. The next thing I'll talk about is title. Title is a class. That class is only going to be applied to any element that has that class. And again, I'm just introducing you these concepts. You don't need to commit this quite yet, but we're going to see how that means something later on. So I'm saying the size is 20 pixels. That actually is not a real thing. More like height should be that. Font size, there should be actually a font in front of it, font hyphen size. Size by itself really means nothing. So that's a typo on my example as well. Hashtag flag, that's an ID. An ID is unique. You can only use an ID once on a page. You can't use classes. You can use multiple times. I could have like 30 divs, and I could call that each of them title, apply the rules. That's good semantic CSS. The thing about CSS, it's not going to punish you when you make a mistake. But when you start having cross-browser issues and things like that, these are things to know. If you want to tag something, you say, hey, I want every 30 so-and-so pages, I want that one page, I want that one element to have a red box around it. Use an ID. It's unique. Can't change that. Title, multiple divs, you can affect them. And commenting. Commenting is a way to leave a message to yourselves, to your developers. It's a communication tool. I'm going to dive into each one of these. What height? 100 pixels. This can be changed. It can be 100 pixels. It can be 100 points. It could be 2 M's. It could be 1 REM. And these are just ways that the DOM itself is converting units of measure. So if you call something 1 rem or 1 rem, it's an M space. That's borrowing from layout again. An M space is the letter M and the width of that letter applied to a value. So if you have a 12-point font, the width of that M defines your 1M. You don't need to remember that, but look it up sometime. It might be interesting. This down here, margin. This is interesting. This is going to be the rule for a lot of things. I'm using margin here, but it applies to padding, it applies to border. I have 4 numbers that follow it, 0, 0, 20 pixels, 0. By default, CSS starts from the top, T, right, R, bottom, B, L, left. T, R, B, L. Top means there is 0 margin on the top. 0, 0 margins on the right. I have 20 pixels on the bottom, and I have 0 pixels to the left. That's all that means. If I change that with padding, it's going to do the same thing, but inside the border. One thing before I continue, that dot, purely for classes. That's why I kept calling that a class. That's why I could look at this and if you just named it out to me, I know it's a class, there's a dot in front of it. Hashtag, that's a flag, or pound, whatever you'd like to call it, depending on your generation, I suppose. Div class main box. So let's see. Did I skip? Nope, perfect. So this is going to be a nice opportunity for us to jump into CodePen. If you have CodePen up, we can do this together. So this is basically applying these styles to a box that I'm going to create. And I'm going to create this first box. I'm going to create a div. So let's do that now. So I'm going to go ahead, erase all of this. I'm going to create that div again. And I'm going to give it the class name that I define. And what I'm hoping is I'm actually hoping that I make a couple of mistakes. I'm hoping that I kind of made a few typos that we can work through together, because that's some of the beauty of CSS, is learning through those experiences. So I created a first div main box, and that's going to be my container. It's going to hold all of the information that I want. It's going to isolate that information in a meaningful way. Everything that's in that main box is relative to main box as well. So in main box, I believe I showed you guys this earlier. I created a header. And I created a paragraph. All right, so now we have the same container that we started with earlier. Up until now, it's pretty familiar. I'm gonna do the same thing that I did before. I'm gonna give the box a title. And you know what? I'm just gonna wing this one and say, this is an extra awesome, super great time, and it's truth. You guys are having a blast. And let's see, right now, that's all we have so far, so let's start with that. And we're gonna start styling it. So this is the ugly HTML, pure. It's always gonna be Times New Roman. This is default to every browser. Just a quick side note, people can change it on their own browsers, but typically it's gonna be this default. Let's add a border to main box, and we're gonna add padding to it. So let's do that right now. Padding, and I'm switching the order. You'll realize that once I'm done, and then I'll add the border underneath. Now I'm not typing this in order, but I want to make sure that I'm getting the right values. Border, padding, 20 pixels, perfect. Cool. And the border, I'm going to make 1 pixel. And I'm hoping you guys saw what just happened there. This is the nice thing about CodePen. The things that I do affect this right out of the box. So I added the padding to that. If I change that to 0, it's moving. 20 pixels, moving. If I made it 50, it moves even further. But that's what's going on. The next thing is I'm gonna add a border. I'm not done adding anything yet. Everything needs to close with a semicolon. I'm gonna make that border 1 pixel. It's gonna be applied to the main box. I'm gonna make it solid. I can make it dotted, but I'm gonna make it solid. And I'm gonna use the RGBA values. RGBA stands for red, green, blue, alpha channel. And let's give it 0 red. We're gonna give it 0 green, give it 0 blue, and we'll give it an alpha of 1. So in the absence of color, on the spectrum of zeros, when everything is 0, it's black. And when everything is maximum output of color, it's F. There's hexadecimal that we'll talk about later, but this is black. And if you want me to make it lighter, I can. The alpha is on a value of 0 to 1, which means if I want this at 50%, I make it 0.5. It's hard to read. If I want to make it 25%, it goes lighter. If I want to make it even lighter, it's even lighter. So we'll start at, we'll start at 1. Maybe we could change it later on. So this is basically it. We just built our first thing, whatever it is. It's a box. Let's I'm going to go a little bit off book. Let's give it a font family just to make it look a little bit better. There are things that are related to CSS only. If you name the specific font, but it also understands generalizations. So I don't need to call this, I don't need to name a specific font right now. I could just call it sans serif. But I think I have Verdana, I think I have Arial, and I think I have Helvetica. And it's going to pick one of those, and it's going to apply them. And these are the names that get applied. And that's it. So these font families are being applied. That means if Verdana's not there, it's going to fall back, and it's going to say, okay, if you don't have Verdana, I'm going to give you Arial. All right, damn. All right, if you don't have Arial, I'm going to fall back, and I'm going to give you Helvetica. All right, great. If you don't have Helvetica, I'm just going to give you some generic sans serif that I want to give you. And that's how it is. The order in which that those font families appear is the order in which the DOM is actually going to translate it onto your project. There is something to be said of note, is that you can add unique fonts. If you've ever heard of Google Fonts, you can apply them to your project, and then that name, that font name, has the ability to become part of the font family. Okay. I'm going to try and stay away from caveats right now, just because it's going to probably make things a little more complicated than we need them. So let's now change what our head one is going to look like. So that's a class. Main box, modifying the div main box. And everything that's a child of it inherits those properties. So when I changed the font of main box, H1 inherited it and P inherited it. Everything cascades down. See what happened there? Nice. All right, so these styles, they have a relationship to them, and they inherit these properties, and it's good to make sure that you're aware of that. So let's make the font of H1 20 pixels. And I'm going to see how I'm doing on time so I don't go over too much. And what else are we doing? Yeah, cool. And this is a great time to talk about this. So the font size of H1 I've turned to 20 pixels. And I'm about to do something, and this is going to call to light something interesting. Main box, when there's a space between it and another selecting element, it means that the property of main box P is going to say this child of this element to take this property. So what should happen is this is an awesome, super great time. It should turn blue, and hopefully that happens when I do that. Cool. Cool. I see what happened. Do you guys see what happened? It's now picking up the color that I threw on. No dot, no class. So these are little getches that happen all the time, but it just shows how important it is to have that. It takes more than it takes. Cool. So you might be asking yourself, hey, we changed this color using RGBA and then we use blue. There are certain words that are inherent to these documents, these files, through different browsers have different rules. One browser might have a blue that falls within this range, or like a cyan that falls within this range. On another browser it might be different. But these blue, you can use colors. You can use red. I could call this green, and it will change that color the same way. Cool. Let's go to the next. So now that we've got a bunch of stuff going on, I've introduced you guys to the concept of a class, an element. Let's try some pseudo classes. What does it mean when you hover? And that's a pseudo class. That's a state change for an element that you're using. So let's add that. And I believe I nested it within. And that's actually a terminology that you guys can borrow. When I put an element within an element, it's nesting. And when I cascade down that nest, it means I'm applying these values to each one along that line. So I believe my first example, I was going to link us to Google, and I believe I created a break. So let's add that. I'm going to add a hyperlink reference, and Did I do anything else for this example? No, it looks like it. And I introduced a new element to you guys, and that's called line break. BR/close tag. That's HTML. You don't need to really commit that to memory, but it's just something you can know. It's a BR. It means the text that comes after it is gonna jump into the next line. So BR, I'm gonna add a new value for the anchor. And I keep doing that, funny enough. Let's make the color a gray. And let's give this a new rule. So what you should have seen is there was an underline before, there is an underline now. I'm applying these styles to this in a very simple way. These styles are making these changes as I go along. They're happening live, which is awesome. And I'm gonna do this. And I'm gonna take that color 2277DD. And this is the first time you guys are seeing this, but it is the hexadecimal value of a color. And cool. Cool. Let me add that to this really quickly, and let's see what happens once I start interacting with it. This is a pseudo class. Hover, there's also visited, which is another pseudo class. These are default to your browsers. They're always used whenever you need to make a change to a part of the DOM that is default to any browser. So let's see what happens. Let's say hover over Google, bang. So it's now picking up the value of my pseudo class. The color, it's going to actually take the text decoration none. Actually, let me change that just quickly. Underline. And what you should also notice is that my cursor is an arrow. I can affect all of these properties right from CSS. It has complete control over that stuff. So again, let's go back to this. This is my HTML. I introduced these new breaks for you, and this is, again, the element, and this is a pseudo class. Everything's built on this stuff. It's all over the internet, and you can extend on it. You could expand on it even further. So let's add a new line. I'm going to introduce you guys to a new concept now. And I'm going to add this thing, which kind of might trip you guys up, which just means space. I'm adding space to this. And I'm giving this an ID. And what this means is I can't use this again. I will not be able to use the concept of, and can you guys see this? Yeah. I cannot use the ID social ever again. That's my one place that I can use it. So let's go ahead and put it to some good use. First, I'm going to say social is going to have a value. And let's do the same thing as before. None. And let's give this its own pseudo class. F7 5B. Why did I choose such a complicated color? I have no idea. F7 5B. All right. Did I get it? I think I did. Let's see. Text declaration. No, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. So we have a new player, Facebook. Basically the same. I didn't really change anything here. I can make this whatever I want, but I decided I'm going to put it over there. Actually, kind of, I could literally do anything I want to this thing. works on the fly. Maybe we'll try that a little bit later on. Cool. So these changes, I've created new rules. This color is different than the color before, and I did something interesting with the cursor, and that is, for this one, it's going to be default. That's what default means. Not the default behavior of the cursor, but a default cursor that is used. That is a default cursor, and when I use pointer, it turns into a finger, changes the color, and you have complete control over those changes as well. All right, so social hover, that gives us that, and that really is the extent of classes, pseudo classes, and IDs. I think I will give you guys one more thing, and then we'll jump into the wild. So with those basic tools, we can run through a gambit of a few ideas that I think will be kind of interesting for you guys. So off the top of your head, you guys have like a website that you frequent relatively often that you're somewhat familiar with? Feel free to shout it out, any site that you guys want. Facebook? I'm much rather go to Reddit, I think, because you're not gonna look at my Facebook account, buddy. All right. All right, so let's go to Reddit really quick. See what's going on there. Mind you, I've never done this before, so this is actually gonna test this theory. All right, so let's make a change. Let's say we're product managers. We say we want to test out. We want to talk to our designer and say, hey, we want a new button on this Reddit page, on this front page, and we kind of want to make sure that we want to test it, we want it to be clear, and we want to measure some type of engagement. Maybe it's send a special message to someone. So we're going to do that right now. Let's just make that happen. It's putting myself on the spot, but you know what? You live dangerous. Let's do this. Let's inspect this. Now you have a bunch of text. You've probably seen this before if you've ever opened this thing. You're like, Jesus Christ, there's so much text here. There is no difference between this text information and the little text that I showed you. You've got an anchor, you have a class, you have a title. That's one class, you have another title, another class, may-blank, another class, outbound. There are three classes happening within this class, and the delineator is a space for classes. So I can add as many classes to an element as I want, and maybe this is saying this title class is going to give it this text size. This may blank is going to give it a color, and the fact that it's outbound might be a tag that JavaScript is taking. No one is sitting there writing this anymore. You just need to understand it. This is most likely generated by some type of scaffolding. So there's Java that's being ran somewhere else that is pumping all this information, and through just a generating tool is creating all these things on the fly, because no one is going to write token equals AQAAUFH there. That doesn't happen. So with that being said, this is just like what we saw earlier. It's the same stuff, just skinned a little bit differently. Data outbound URL, that's a specific tag that is generated from them. It's unique, but it's no different than throwing another name like age, reference, or anything else, insofar as CSS is concerned. Go ahead.
So is this referencing an external file, these classes that we're seeing here, so the properties of those would be in that external file that it's referencing?
Exactly, and let me show you. So why don't we click into, since we're talking about this section here. So here, I'm looking at all of the things that's making this work, CSS-wise, right here. Let me see if I can make this bigger so you guys can see it. And yes, I can. And yes, I can. Again, I'm winning right now. I'm winning right now. All right, so what you're going to see is this is exactly what we were writing before. Background, 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 hyphen, image, position, repeat, whatever. But there's something interesting that's happening. I'm going to draw your eye there. That is the CSS file that is generating this information. So let's say, what do we click on? Class. Thumbnail, right here, that's a class. Go over here, thumbnail. That's the class. This is what the rules around it. That's the file. See what happens when we click the file. Ready? It's going to be scary. Well, walk with me. It's going to be okay. Damn. All right. You think it's one line of information, but what you don't realize, it's one line with 185,513 columns, which means that this is one line and each of these characters is a column. It's that big. No one's writing this much code on the fly. There's products there. They've added, and I'm going to use terminology that you're familiar with probably, Angular, jQuery. All of those things are pulling CSS rules and applying it to that. And that's what you're looking at. You're looking at that product, and in order for this to be small enough that your web page can use it, it just smushes everything together. It takes all of that nice space that helps us read it as people and makes it easier to load. But we're not going to get into performance right now, but that's all it is. So remember, the fundamentals that I showed you 25 minutes ago apply to everything, universally, all the time. All right, let's go back. Let's get back to this thing. So, I'll get that out of the way. I'm going to kick this over here. And we said we're going to add a button. Let's add that button. All right, I'm going to put it, let me see if I can get it to the top. So what you see me doing, and I'm using Chrome right now. And Google Chrome is what I like using. You can use Firefox, use whatever you want. I don't think Safari supports this, but I'm going to start injecting some code into this. It's not going to affect the website itself. It's only going to affect it on my local machine. So let's open this up. You're familiar with this terminology, right? Elements. It's telling me, here are all the players that are on this page. I'm going to try and get to the top form, the topmost part of this. If you're not familiar with HTML, there are rules. HTML, header, body. Well, that's not header. HTML, head, body, close HTML. That's the rule for every site. It should always follow that. I'm just going to the top level so I can just mess around with this stuff. So let's edit as HTML. And I have all of this stuff. And what I'm going to do, hopefully this works, is I'm going to introduce a new div, my div. And I am going to do something that you guys are familiar with. I'm going to add inline CSS. I don't want to mess with all this stuff right here. I'm just going to put it right in there. How do I do that? I add this thing called style. I'm going to give it an equal value. And I'm going to give it a border, 1 pixel, solid. I'm going to make it red. And you know what? I'm just going to see if this appears on the page. Test, and let me make this font size huge so that I can see it. Let's see if this works. Okay, there it is. Cool, we got it. Yeah, you guys see it, right? You guys see it. All right, that's it. All right, great. So now that we have some type of information in here, maybe I want to add a button. I want to make something happen. So, again, I'm talking to my designer. Let's work some stuff out. You don't have time for that? I got this. I'm going to show you a screenshot. Hold on one second. So we're going to come over here. We're going to start adding things to it. Create input. Now this stuff I remember. You can reference a resource that I'm going to show you guys later to help you out with this. But this is how it works. Input type equals button. Title equals my button. And name equals my button. And then cool. That's not what I wanted, but we're gonna fix that. Where is my typo? Cool. Let's see if it works. And it's not. Now, normally I'd throw this up to see what have I done? All right, interesting. All right, you know what? We're gonna make this a link. Here's why. Potentially I have entered into a space where they're controlling what tags and what information they're allowing me to put in. So let's see if I can add a link. We'll just use that for now. And this actually allows me to demonstrate another idea. Google. I'm gonna call this my button. It's gonna look like a link. It doesn't matter. Oh, there's something going on here. All right, let's see what's going on here. Ah, gotcha. So change that to that. That's false. They are not that good. This is actually, in fact, my own fault. I'm gonna fix it. So, this should work. Cool. There's the link up top. And let's go back to the original idea. Oh, absolutely. I forget that I'm looking at it like this close. All right, you got it. Let me see if I can just put this back in. All right, so this is the button that I was spending all that time trying to figure out how to put in, but we got through it. Button, top left corner, zoomed in, right, for your pleasure. You guys see it? Perfect. All right, so we're gonna make this smaller again, but now that you see it, we're gonna add some CSS to it. So now that I have it there, we're talking to our designer, like, all right, we wanna change some things up, and I want to add my style. This is back to the inline. I'm gonna make some rules. Border 1 pixel. Solid. You guys remember this, I'm sure. Probably tired of seeing this at this point. I'm gonna make the background color EE. I may not have introduced you to background color, but it's exactly what you guys are familiar with. And let's see if we can do something kind of cool. Border radius 3 pixels to give it some type of interesting value. And you know what? I want to give it some space. I'm going to give it a margin of 50 pixels. And I think, if you know what I'm saying, somebody's going to see that damn button. You know what I mean? So now, on the fly, I've created some type of context to this page. I don't own Reddit. I'm not in the background. But I can tell them, hey, you know, let's test this thing out. We have a button. And this can happen anywhere on the site. So it's really powerful. CodePen.io, the Reddit website, you can make these changes on the fly anywhere. And mind you, I didn't do too much to get these off the ground. These just happen. Just go back into, okay, cool. Here. All right, so I basically came through and we used Google Chrome. I showed you guys how we interacted with the DOM, which is called the document object model. You don't really need to know that, but someone tests you on it. So what's the next steps? So we've gone through a lot of stuff. I think it's a lot of stuff. I brought you down like a very narrow purview, but everything that I've talked to you about, you should go out and sort of try to leverage and use on your own on your own. So w3.org, World Wide Web Consortium, CSS Tricks, and A List Apart are 3 places that I've used in the past that have been really effective in terms of me learning more, seeing how things have changed, how applying HTML5 elements and CSS3 stuff, which are brand new to this space, to my own projects. Things that I haven't talked about today, and I'm pretty aware of that, is I haven't talked to you guys about Css, I haven't talked Sass, about less. I haven't talked to you guys about how can you create like a style sheet with a huge product that has variables and so many rules, and it's massive. There are tools out there that blow out beyond this in crazy ways, in ways that I really can't get into today. But if you want to go and learn more about them, these are places that you can get those resources, and they're very effective. And your developers are going to come to you with questions, or you're going to want to dig your heels into them. And all they are, and I'll talk about those really quickly. Sass is something that runs at run compile, yes, emphasis, which allows you to say, I'm going to spit up this code, and I want this code to create these style sheets, but I don't want to make every style sheet. I want the code to generate these style sheets, and I want these colors to be consistent around everything, and I want these variables to cascade and blow up my style sheets. So I have like 20 style sheets for very specific things, and they're going to be 150,000 columns wide. That's all it is. So if you want to learn more about those, feel free to jump in.
I'm sorry, are those the CSS preprocessors?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So exploring, experimenting. We talked about a few. We were working with CodePen. There's JS Fiddle, there's Core, there's Stack Overflow. These are great resources to jump into, ask questions. Some questions have already been asked that you can get answers to. Very effective, super effective. See how I'm doing on time? Okay. So, I guess in closing, so there are tons of ways to apply CSS, right? Like experimenting is up to you. I gave you an intro, I gave you a flavor of it. But in that flavor, in that moment, what we were able to do is we created a button today. We created a button that's testable. We created a button that we could communicate to a team. We learned about properties and elements. All those are available to us. There's ways that this could be a lot more powerful. There's JavaScript that blows this even further. Like classes can touch JavaScript. Like it gets super crazy. There are people who dedicate their whole time, and you really, unless you guys want to be a front-end developers, you're never going to dive 2 feet first into this in that way. So what I recommend you do is have conversations with your team. Let them know that you're interested in learning. And again, this is Intro to CSS for product managers. So my vantage point is your responsibility as a product manager is to contextualize problems, is to empower your teams to solve them. And you can only do that if they feel that you're on their side. And then one of the best ways to do that is to speak their language. So yeah, that's experimenting is where the learning happens. Got any questions? Please.
Thank you, this is great. As non-front-end developers looking at, what are some best practices that you could, like, things like you mentioned, commenting out the code? Is that something that is considered best practices? And even though you might not know all the nuances, you could say, you could look at it and say, well, nothing's commented. That could be problematic in transitions.
Yeah.
Things like that are best practices?
Yeah, I mean, the rules around commenting code and things like that is always best left to your director of development. You have some guy that's on your team or girl who's on your team that is trying to work with you in a way that is they need to do right by their team, and it's their responsibility to pass knowledge in their space. Now, if you want to say, hey, you can here's an example conversation. I've had this conversation. It's like, hey, I want to build this button. I want this button to do X, Y, and Z. And the team comes back to me and say, hey, you know what? Can't do X and Y. We could do Z. And I'm like, but the test, it won't allow me to test this if we don't do X, Y, and Z. Whether you're a developer or a product manager or designer, we're all in agreement that this is a meaningful test unless we do X, Y, and Z. This is a perfect time for me to say, you know what? Just comment it out. And it's like, oh yeah, we could do that. And it's not being smart. It's not being, necessarily like, hey, I know the answer to this now. Rather, you're looking at it from a different vantage point. And your vantage point, if you have the terminology on hand, it becomes very, very helpful. In terms of best practices, there are some. And I'll quickly just talk about the concept of Angular Foundation. There's, what's the one that I'm using it, and it always escapes me for some reason, that Facebook just put out. It's a JavaScript framework, React, thank you so much. It's like this hot thing, right? They all have rules around them that manage how you CSS and JavaScript. They have their own rules, they have documentation. Go to W3C, look up the documentation if you really want to take that time to understand what those best practices are for that framework. You can learn them if it's going to be meaningful to your organization. But those are where the best practices will lie at this point.
Yeah. If I could just follow up, what you said was interesting, but those best practices probably come from that team.
Correct.
So maybe as a product manager, you're going to have to get into that degree of detail.
Exactly. Yeah, no problem.
So one thing I'm curious about, like the button situation that you described.
Yeah.
Can you get away, why can't you get away with doing something like that in PowerPoint where you just screenshot that and then you throw on the button and talk to your team that way? I'm just trying to better understand.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the things I didn't do with that button is I didn't add any interaction.
Yeah.
One of the things about that button is it's clickable. I could have added an alert to it, which is a JavaScript concept that I can integrate with that, but I could do things to it in a way that PowerPoint can't capture, and depends on speed. If your response, CSS is a tool, right? And you need to use the right tool for the problem that you have. So if your responsibility is to say, I need to visually represent something to my team in a way that they can just see it in one dimension and they get it, PowerPoint might be the perfect tool. Pen and pencil might be, pencil and paper might be the perfect tool. However, if you want to add interactivity and there's a subtlety, and another thing I didn't do is we didn't talk about libraries, massive libraries that have transitions in them and like color shifts and things like that. If those are vital to you getting that idea across and you don't have the time to like keyframe a whole visual, this might be a great shortcut for you. But again, it's up to you. You're the decision maker in that particular space, and it's really empowering you to have the conversations to realize that idea. Cool. Anyone else? Cool. Damn, this is easy. You guys are good. Next week, you guys are coming in, you're doing this. Cool. If there's nothing else, let me take you to the last slide, and I'll invite my man in the back up front.